Okay, we're up to Peidal and Aleph. We're at the top of the Yomid. Just to review, the Mishnah had said that the laws of Kisi Adam do not apply to Mukdashim. Now, Karbonis. Mukdashim means belonging to the Beis HaMikdash. So we assume it's a carbon. Now, it's obvious that Kisi Adam only applies to birds and chayas. Now, obviously, there's no Karbonis that are chayas. So it must be birds. So the Pashup Shad is that if you have a bird carbon, like a Chata Saif or other Saif, there's no Kisi Adam. So the Gemara wanted to know before, why not? So the Gemara first said maybe the reason why there's no Kisi Adam is because for practical reasons there's no possibility of how to do it practically. The reason being is because you can't, the dam has to go straight into the Mizbeach, and to put the offer under it, which is a necessity, would be a chatzitza. So the Gemara said, so why don't you just scrape it off and then do Kisi Adam? So there'll be different stages. So normally the blood just falls on over here. You'd have to scrape it off and then do Kisi Adam. So it's no chatzitza purposes. The Gemara says you're right. Karbanes taka, you do have to do Kisi Adam. So what does the Mishnah mean when there's no Kisi Adam by Mikdashim? It means kadshe bedek habayis. Kadshe bedek habayis means that if you donate an animal to belong to the Beis HaMikdash, so you donate a chicken, so that chicken you can't eat because it's hana, it's meila, it belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. If that chicken is shechted for whatever reason, I don't know why it would be shechted. If it's shechted for a very reason, there's no Kisi Adam. Why not? Because this Tana follows the view of Rav Meir. That Rav Meir holds that a shchita she'ena roya lo yishma shchita lina Kisi Adam, which means that if you shecht an animal and the shchita does not allow you to eat the animal, so in this case you shecht kadshe bedek habayis, you can't eat it. So because you can't eat it, there's no obligation of Kisi Adam. That's what we did yesterday. Says the Gemara, so you shechted the chicken, so you don't do Kisi Adam because you can't eat the chicken. So why don't you then redeem it? Transfer the holiness onto cash, so now you could eat it, and then you'll do Kisi Adam. The reason why you're not doing Kisi Adam is because there's no heter achila, so make it mutar ba'achila. Transfer the holiness onto cash. There's a way to redeem kadshe bedek habayis. So says the Gemara, I'll tell you why you can't. Be'inan hamada v'haracha. This Tana follows the view of Rav Meir. Actually, I said before Rav Meir Shita. I apologize. We'll have to. It's not Rav Meir Shita. Shchita she'ena roya is not Rav Meir, that's Rav Shimon. Anyway, the point is it follows Rav Meir. The Rav Meir held that in order to redeem kadshe bedek habayis, it has to be stood up and evaluated. Right? Karbanis, if Karbanis get a mum and you have to transfer holiness onto cash, it needs hamad of haracha, which means it must be stood up in front of an expert and assessed. Rav Meir Shita is that that's true with kadshe bedek habayis as well. So the reason why you can't transfer holiness from a dead chicken is because you can't stand up a dead chicken. It can't be assessed. It can be assessed, but it can't stand and be assessed. In order for kadshe bedek habayis to be redeemed, it needs to be able to stand on its own. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. Here's the problem. So you're telling me that karbanis, you do Kisi Adam, kadshe bedek habayis not. Why not? Because when you shecht it, it's not matar achila. And shchita she'ena roya lo yishma shchita for Kisi Adam. But, so why can't I transfer holiness onto cash? Because you can't transfer holiness onto cash, because in order to transfer holiness, it needs to be assessed. And it needs to not only be assessed, but it needs to be able to stand on its own for the assessment. The problem is that those two shitas don't go together. The Tanoim who hold that it needs to be assessed do not believe that a shchita has to be matar achila for Kisi Adam. And the Tanoim who believe that a shchita has to be matar achila for Kisi Adam do not believe that it needs to be assessed. So the problem is our Tana is sort of taking both chumras. It's saying that if a shchita is not matar achila, there's no Kisi Adam. And it's saying that if an animal cannot stand on its own, it's not able to be redeemed from kadshe bedek habayis. Nobody holds that way. Says the Gemara, come on. If it's Rav Meir who says that in order to transfer the holiness onto cash, you need to be able to stand on its own. But Rav Meir Shita is that if you shecht an animal, even if you can't eat the animal, you still have to do Kisi Adam. And if it follows Rav Shimon who holds that a shchita she'ena roya lo yishma shchita, that a shchita that's not matar achila is not obligated in Kisi Adam. But Rav Shimon Shita is that you don't have to stand up an animal. It doesn't have to be able to stand up on its own in order to be redeemed. So who is this Tana who's putting these two shitas together? So the Gemara says very simply, it's not Rav Meir and it's not Rav Shimon. Who is it? It's Rav Yehuda Anasi. And Rav Yehuda Anasi follows Rav Meir in one halacha and follows Rav Shimon in another halacha. Rav Yosef, Rabbi, B'nasav aliba tanoi, the shchita she'ena roya savlik Rav Shimon, b'hamad v'arocha savlik Rav Meir. Okay, that's the first explanation. Or the second explanation, that really follows Rav Shimon. Now, Rav Shimon Shita is that a shchita she'en aroi lo yishma shchita. It's not matter achila. So he said, okay, so why don't you transfer the holiness onto cash? And Rav Shimon Shita is that it doesn't have to be stood up. So you could take a transfer the holiness onto cash. So why don't you? The Gemara says, I'll tell you why. Because the very fact that you have to transfer the holiness onto cash makes it potter from kisei adam. Why is that? The pasuk says regarding kisei adam, v'shafach v'chisa. The blood spills and you cover. Only an animal that does not require any other stages is obligated in kisei adam. Kisei adam only applies to an animal that the second you shecht it, you could do kisei adam. An animal that after the shechita needs to be redeemed, that's too many steps. That's excluded from the Torah. So the reason why itaka normally a shechita she'enaroi lo yishma shechita. So why can't I transfer the honos onto cash? The answer is the very fact that you have to makes it exempt from kisei adam. Mi she'ena mechuser shvicha v'kisoy yatzazeh shemechuser shvicha peridia v'kisoy. Because it has an added step, it's excluded. It's exeris hakosav that it's excluded from the Torah. So says the Gemara. The truth is, now that you're going with this approach, that anytime there's an added step, it's exempt, we actually can now go back and go with the original approach that we tried yesterday. That when the Mishnah says that a Mekudashim does not have Kisei Adam, we originally thought that it was a carbon, and we said, why? So we said, well, you can't do Kisei Adam because the dirt under the blood would be a Chatzitza, so we said, why don't you just do this? Put the blood on the Mizbeach, then scrape it off, then do Kisei Adam. The answer is, according to this, it makes sense. You can't do it. Why? Anytime an added step is necessary, it's potter from Kisei Adam. So the very fact that you have to scrape it off and there's no alternative makes it exempt from Kisei Adam. Now you could actually make it that the Mishnah is referring to karbanos, and even karbanos don't have to do Kisei Adam. Why? Because the very fact that the only way to do it is through scraping it off makes it exempt. Okay, another explanation on what the Mishnah is referring to when it says that its karbanos are exempt. So we said yesterday, we're trying to figure out why are karbanos exempt, right? Why are the bird karbanos? So we said maybe chatzitza, so why don't you scrape it off? So the Gemara says very simple. The pasuk says there are two different types of species that are obligated in Kisei Adam: birds and chayas. Now chayas are obviously not referring to karbanos because there's no such thing as a carbon. So two birds are not karbanos also. Meaning, why is it that a chatas ha'oif and oilus ha'oif don't do kisei adam? Because the pasuk says the only species that are chayiv kisei adam are chayas and oifus. Just like chayas, it's obviously not referring to karbanos. So to oifus, the chayiv does not apply to karbanos. Very simple. Keep it symmetrical. Mar Bravashi Omar kro chaya oif. Ma chaya einoi kodesh, af oif einoi kodesh. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. So you're telling me that birds are exempt, bird karbanos are exempt because they have to be similar to chayas. So the Gemara says maybe take it a step further. Maybe that species of bird is exempt even when it's not a carbon. Maybe a pigeon, which is a type of a carbon, even when it's not a carbon, should be exempt as well. So turtle doves and young doves should be exempt entirely because they're sometimes a carbon. So the Gemara says no. The answer is it has to be like a chaya, just like the chayas. All chayas are the same in that they do not apply to karbanos, but outside of karbanos they're all chayiv. It's binary. All chayas are chayiv. No chayas karbanos are included because it's not a thing. Birds as well. All birds are chayiv. No bird karbanos are chayiv. So it's very simple. Yes and no. Okay. So the Gemara is a kasha. We've gone now to this whole approach has been that chayas are chayiv in kisei adam, birds are chayiv in kisei adam, as the pasuk says, but behemoths are not. The question is why? When the Torah describes chaya, how do I know that it doesn't include a behemoth? Now you'll say, why would chaya include a behemoth? Well, behemoth includes a chaya, right? The behemoth, the pasuk says that a behemoth has to chew its cud and have split hooves. That applies to chayas as well, because we said earlier in the Masechta that when the pasuk says behemoth, it means chaya. So why don't you say the same thing? When the pasuk says chaya for kisei adam, it means behemoth as well. Meaning, how do I know behemoths are not obligated in kisei adam? Says the Gemara, Amalei Yaakov Mina l'Rava. Yaakov Mina said to Rava, Kaimal and Chai b'chlal behema l'simanim. We know that when the pasuk says for behema that it has two kosher simanim, it includes a chaya. So emanami behema b'klal chaya l'kisoy. So say the same thing that for Kisei Adam, that when the pasuk says Chaya, it means Behema as well. So how do you know Behemas are potter from Kisei Adam? Amar Lei, so he said to Yaakov, Alech Amar Kra, because there's another pasuk. The way I know that Behemas are potter from Kisei Adam is because the pasuk says by Behemas, it tells you not to drink the blood of a behema, and it says Ala Aretz Tishbechenu Kamayim. You should pour the blood on the floor like water. The pasuk compares the blood of a behema to water. In what way? Mamayim loy boy kisui. Af behemas loy boy kisui. Just like water does not require to be covered, there's no covering of water, that's not a ritual, so too the blood of a behema, which is described like water, also does not require kisei adam. So the source that behemas are potter from kisei adam is because the pasuk says that their blood is like water, and water does not require covering. So it says the Gemara, wait a minute, you're telling me that the pasuk, when it says that the blood of a behema is like water, it's mamish like water, so you should be able to be toivel in a mikveh of dam. You can be toivel mikveh water. Why can't I be toivel mikveh dam? So you're telling me that the dam behema is mamish like water. Then why can't I dip in a mikveh of blood? Amakra, the pasuk says regarding mikvos, ach mayan ubar mikveh mayim yatar. The pasuk says it has to be water. Haniyin midyachrin, because the pasuk specifically says water. It's excluding dam. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. Maybe the pasuk when it says water is excluding apple juice and wine. But dam, where the pasuk describes dam as tishbechenu kamayim, maybe that's included in mayim. Just because the pasuk says water, maybe it's excluding all other liquids, but not dam. So the answer is there's two psukim. Mayon mayim ubar mayim. It says mayim twice. One is to exclude other liquids, and one is to exclude blood from the mikveh. So says the Gemara, wait a minute. Maybe both psukim are excluding other liquids. Really, you could be toivel and dam. So why do I have two exclusionary terms? One is to exclude other liquids. There's two different types of mikvahs. There's flowing water, flowing fresh water, and then there's gathered rainwater. It's two different types. So maybe the two psukim are being mamayit other liquids, that other liquids like milk. You can't have milk gathered, you can't have milk flowing as a mikvah. But maybe dam is included. So the answer is tlasam yutiksiv, mayim, bar mayim, mikvah mayim. It says the word mayim 3 times. 2 is to exclude other liquids in all forms, and 1 is to exclude dam. Okay. So Tana Rabbanon, pasuk says asher yotzud. This is a pasuk in Vayikra. When it's describing Kisei Adam, it says ish b'nei Yisrael asher yotzud tseid chaya. That if he surely traps a chaya, oif, and then you do Kisei Adam. What's the lashon asher yotzud and tseid? Ainly al asher yotzud. I only know that you're obligated to do Kisei Adam if you trap a wild animal. But what about nitzud nevoid me'aleim mayim? Menayin. How do I know that an oif or a chaya that are housebound? Right? Chayas are wild. So how do I know that it's not just wild birds or wild chayas? Let's say you have a bird that's not wild, like a chicken, where you own. How do you know that Kisei Adam applies as well? Talmud loymar tseid mikol makom. The extra tseid tells me any form of prey. Asher yotzud is to trap. Tseid, a prey, means any prey, any behemo, any oif or chaya is chayiv in Kisei Adam. Imkein matam loymar asher yotzud. So if it applies, whether they're wild or not, whether they're trapped or not, why does the pasuk say asher yotzud? Why are you mentioning that you're trapping the wild animal if it applies to domesticated wild animals as well? I don't know if that's a thing, but domesticated birds as well. So lim de tar derech haaretz. The pasuk is teaching us a way to save money. A person should not eat meat unless he traps the meat. Meaning, if a person takes his animals, which is like his most chashuva commodity, and shechs it to eat it all the time, he's going to lose all his money. So therefore, if you want to eat meat, you got to trap it. You got to trap a chaya. Because to start taking your, sheeps and goat and cows and oxen and shechting, it's not kedai. So now the Gemara is going to talk about lessons about not being overindulgent. Tana Rabbanan, ki yarchiv Hashem lekecha es gevolcha. When Hashem will broaden your boundary. The pasuk says, before we entered Eretz Yisrael, we were only able to eat karbanos. Once you enter Eretz Yisrael, you'll be able to eat any animal you want. You shecht any animal you want. That's kosher. Lim de Torah derech haaretz. The Torah is teaching us a proper way of life. You should only eat meat when you really need it. It's like a special occasion, but just to eat meat all the time, it's financially not kedai. Now, a person thinks that if he desires meat, he should buy it from the market, meaning that you should spend all your money on meat. No, take one of your cattle, meaning save the money and take one of your own. Don't buy meat from the store. Well, if you're going to take your own cattle and eat it, so you might think you should eat all of your cattle. Only a percentage of it. You have to make sure that you have money for a rainy day. From here, Rav Elazar ben Azariah said, if he only has a mana, which is a small amount of money, he should only eat vegetables. It's the cheapest food. Asara mana, if he has 10 mana, then he could afford to spend on fish, meaning be frugal and be wise with your money. Chamisha mana, if he has 50 mana, then he could afford a liter of basar. And meya mana, if he has meya mana, then he could cook meat every day because he has enough money. But for the people who can't afford meat all the time, when is a time where they should indulge in meat? On Shabbos, you should push to have meat. Amar Rav. Rav says we should follow the approach of Elazar ben Azariah to not eat meat all the time and to be very frugal. Rav Yochanan says, Abba mi mishpachas briim have. Rav, who said that we should not spend money on meat, is because he was from a very healthy family. So they were healthy physically, so they could afford not eating meat all the time, because they had vitamins and other things. But aval kagayin anu, but us who are poor, not poor, they're not healthy. Then spend all the money you can on meat, because if that's you need protein, so you got to spend the money. Rav Nachman says we would borrow money in order to have food, meaning this being frugal only works if you're healthy. If you're not healthy, then you need nutrients. Says the Gemara, Kivasim ulvoshecha. This is a pasuk in Mishlei, and it's giving advice. It says that lambs should be your clothing. It means that you should buy lambs, and then you could use the wool that naturally grows from them in order for your clothing. It's a win-win. And flocks will be part of your field. Exchange flocks for the field. A person should sell his field and buy cattle. And don't sell your cattle and buy field. Because while they both have returns, cattle they multiply very quickly. They also have milk or wool. They naturally give back, and they're a better return than even real estate. The day chaylev izim, and the milk of your goats be sufficient. A person should not buy milk. You should have the milk of your goats, meaning you should live off your own animals. Your food, the food of your household. It means your food and then the food of your household. It means that before you indulge in your family, make sure that you have enough necessities, because you're the one who goes to work. You have to have strength. In the life of your naresecha, a person should give life to his children. What does that mean? Should teach his children the way of life in a proper way. Make sure they're not too gashmiistic. Don't teach your children to only enjoy meat and wine. They should be simple people. Rav Yochanan, go to the next page. Rav Yochanan says, if a person wants to become wealthy, he should raise small animals like sheep and goats, because they're cheap, they grow very quickly, and they give back with wool and milk. That's the meaning of the pasuk, Ashtorei Seinecha, which means flocks, but Shemasheres, as Balea. Ashtorei is also for Lashon Ashirus. It makes them wealthy. Rav Yochanan. Now, Rav Yochanan is giving advice. Kisa de charshin, v'li kisa de parshin. I'd rather drink a cup from a kishuf, from a sorcerer, than a cup of lukewarm water. Meaning, obviously, water from a sorcerer is not a good idea, because they could have put a spell on it. I'd rather drink that than lukewarm water. The reason why is lukewarm water, especially when it's warmed up in metal, there was bacteria. Now, if it was boiled, then that would kill the bacteria, but it was lukewarm. So because the bacteria is even worse than sorcery. Hani milu kumatachas. That's only if the water is in a metal utensil, which has a lot of bacteria. But in earthenware utensils, apparently less bacteria. Even in a metal utensil, if you throw herbs in it, it's fine, because that kills the bacteria. Also, if you bring it to a boil, then it's fine, because that kills the bacteria. Rav Yochanan says, if a person has a lot of money that he was left by his father, so he's not even a business person, but he was born rich, and he wants to lose all his money, these are 3 bad investments. Yilbash klipishtin, wear linen clothing. It's very expensive, and it does not last long. Yishtamish b'klis chuchis, use glass utensils, which are expensive and break easily. And yiskar payim v'yeshev mohim, hire workers and don't watch them, because they're going to ruin your merchandise. Yilbash kli pishtan, when it says to wear linen clothing, that ruins your finances. Bekisna rumisa, it's Roman linen, which is very, very expensive and wears out quickly. Yishtabish b'klis chuchis, use glass utensils. That's bezugisa chivarta. That's white glass, which is very expensive. Yiskar paylim val yeshev imahem, hire workers, but don't sit with them. That's beturi. That's ox drivers. Dinafish psudayu. That's ox drivers, because if they're not only they might be lazy, but they might drive the oxen in a way that harms them. And the ox is like a truck. If it gets ruined, it's expensive. Darish Rav Avira, Zimnin Amr L'Masheder Ravami, Zimnin Amr L'Masheder Ravasi, Maidich Sif Toiv Ish Chaynin Umal V'Yichalkol Dvarav B'Mishpat. The Gemara continues that this pasuk, this is also a pasuk in Tehillim. Toiv Ish Chaynin Umal V'Yichalkol Dvarav B'Mishpat. Lo'elam Yecha Adam V'Yishte Pachus Mashi Yeshlei. A person, right, the pasuk mentions that a person who is good is gracious and he lends. He conducts his business with justice. What does this mean? What's justice? That a person should eat less than he could afford. Meaning, don't spend all your money on yourself. But spend a lot of money on clothing, because that avoids getting sick. Although you don't spend money on yourself, you should spend more money than you have on your children and your wife. You have to make sure that they feel that they're taken care of. Why? Because they're totally in you and you're totally in God. It means that they're kids, they're looking to you. So if you take care of them, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who you look up, who you turn to, will take care of you as well. Okay, back to the inyan of Kisei Hadam. So there's one halacha that we're going to have, and then we're going to quote it from a brisa that potentially is not like this. Darish Rav Eina apischa de Beirish Galusa. Rav Eina taught the following halacha in the house, the opening to the entrance to the house of Rish Galusa. Hashaychet l'chayla b'Shabbos. If you shecht for a chayla on Shabbos, chayav l'chasas, you have to do kisei adam. Now, what does this mean? So Rashi says what this means is like this: if you're shechting for a chayla, it's obviously pikuach nefesh. So the same way pikuach nefesh is daicha Shabbos, so too kisei adam is also daicha Shabbos. So that means even if what's needed is to break up the dirt, and you have to use a tool to break up the dirt, and you have to mamish potentially be mechal Shabbos, it's allowed. Why? Because included in the shchita, the same way pikuach nefesh permits shchita, part of the shchita is kisei adam properly. So Rashi says, other Rishonim disagree. The Ramban disagrees. He says, no, why would you think that you're allowed to be mechal Shabbos? What it means is, maybe muksa, fine, but to do an issa deraisa for kisei adam, it's a pel. So he says, all it means is, very simple. The pasuk the Gemara is saying is that if you're mechalel Shabbos, but it's for pikuach nefesh, there's kisei adam. Meaning, don't think that this is a shchita that's aser, and therefore kisei adam does not apply. No, kisei adam applies because it's the proper thing to do. It's a mitzvah. Either way, if you're mechalel Shabbos, you do kisei adam. Again, mechal Shabbos is in not be'isser. I'm sorry. If you do it for pikuach nefesh, you do kisei adam. So Amar le Rabbi says ishtamik kamar. He said something shocking. Rabbi was very, very upset by this. Rabbi felt that it's an inappropriate thing to paskin like this. L'shtamit lamorimine, he should remove. They should remove his tongue, or they should remove his platform to speak. He was very upset by this because he said, "How are you allowed to have kisei adam when you're doing shchit on Shabbos?" Now, Tanya. Now, from here until the end of the daf, we're going to quote a very, very long, I think a little bit like a complicated brisa, and we'll deal with it tomorrow. We'll continue the brisa, But there's one line in the brisa that they want to focus on. Titania, Rav Yosi Omer. Koi ein sheichten ois b'yamtiv. Rav Yosi says a koi, which is a suffix, behema suffix chaya, you don't shecht it on yamtiv. The im, why? Because you're not sure whether it's kisadam, because only chayas have kisadam, not behemas. The im shachtai, and if you shechted it, ein mechasen as damai, we're not going to allow you to do muksa or to be mechal yamtiv at all for this suffix. So if you shecht it, there is no kisadam. What's the source? That there's no kisadam on a suffix animal on yamtiv. Mikal v'chomer. It's from the following kal v'chomer. Umam mila shevadei doicha Shabbos. Now when it comes to bris mila, if it's the 8th day, vadai it's doicha Shabbos. Be'ein sveika doicha yamtiv. But suffix bris mila is not doicha yamtiv, which means if you're not sure whether it's the 8th day or the 9th day, the baby was born ben hashmoshes. Even though a vadai mila is doicha Shabbos, a suffix mila is not even doicha yamtiv. Then kisoy she'ein vadai doicha Shabbos. So if Mila, which is Doicha Shabbos, but the suffix is not Doicha Yamtiv, then Kisoy, which is not Doicha Shabbos, Eino Din Shin Sveika Doicha Yamtiv, Kavachoymer, that a suffix Kisedam is not Doicha Yamtiv. So the source that a Koi, which is a suffix, you don't do Kisedam and Yamtiv, is a Kavachoymer. Bris Mila, which is Doicha Shabbos, is not, a suffix is not Doicha Yamtiv. So Kisedam, which is not Doicha Shabbos, Eino Din that the suffix is not Doicha Yamtiv, so it's a Kavachoymer from Bris Mila. Now stop right here. We're going to continue in the very long brisa, but that's the source. The source is from this line. Kisoy ein vadai doicha Shabbos. Vadai kisoy hadam is not doicha Shabbos. What's the case? We're obviously not referring to Chil Shabbos. The whole brisa is talking about learning out from Bris Mila. It's a mitzvah. It must be that you are mechalel Shabbos for pikuach nefesh. You shechted an animal because the chayla needed it, and ein Kisei Hadam Deicha Shabbos. So this is the raya, not like Rav Eina. But let's just keep on with the brisa. So the reason why a koi does not do Kisei Hadam on Yom Tiv is a kavachomer from Bris Mila. If Bris Mila is not Deicha Shabbos, is Deicha Shabbos, but the suffix is not Deicha Yom Tiv, then Kisei Hadam, which is not Deicha Shabbos, kavachomer suffix is not Deicha Yom Tiv. Amruloi, the Rabbanan said to him, Tkiya Shabbos, Tkiya Shayfer begvulin Tchiach. Tkiya Shayfer outside of the Beis Hamikdash will throw this kavachomer off. How so? Ein vadai doicha Shabbos. Tkiya shayfer, vadai is not doicha Shabbos. You don't blow shayfer on Shabbos outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Usveika doicha yamtiv. But a suffix is doicha yamtiv. The Gemara tomorrow will explain what does it mean suffix doicha yamtiv. So it doesn't mean suffix yoim. It means that you'll blow shayfer for a suffix. For a tumtum androgynous, you're not sure whether they're a male or a female, you blow shayfer for them. So you see that the vadai is not Deicha Shabbos, but the suffix is Deicha Yamtiv. So your whole premise is flawed. Heishiv Rav Elazar HaKafer B'Rebbe Tshuva. Rav Elazar HaKafer B'Rebbe said the following tshuva, so the following issue with this. Mala Mila Shekein Eina Neheges Belel Yamtiv. Another argument against Rav Yosi. That Rav Yosi said that a koi is not, you don't do kisadam. It's learned that from Bris Mila, Kavachem from Bris Mila. He says, I have another problem. Mala Mila shekein ein heges belel yom tov, yom tovim. Time bekisa shnai belel yom tov. Your whole point is that which is more chamer, Bris Mila, and that's not doicha. Suffix is not doicha yom tov. Kavachem kisadam. Yeah, but Bris Mila you don't do at night. Kisadam you do at night. So you sure the kisa, so your whole kavachem is off. Maybe Bris Mila is not as chamer. So Amar Rav Abba concludes the brisa. Ze'echem and advarim shamar Rav Chia ein li aleim tshuva. V'heishiv Rav Elazar HaKafer B'Rebbe Tshuva. This Kavachomer of Yosi is one of the things that Rav Chia said I have no response for, but Rav Elazar HaKafer just gave a good response. Okay, the point is though, the Kavachomer of Rav Yosi, the line that's the main significant line was Ein Kisoy Ein Vadei Deicha Shabbos. The Kisei Adam is not Deicha Shabbos. What's the case? Ketani Mias. Kisa shein vade deicha Shabbos. My vade de kisa doli deicha Shabbos. Lava shechel lechoyle is not referring to pikuach nefesh. You shechted on Shabbos for pikuach nefesh, and we started this discussion because Rav Eina said that you do kisa dam. Clearly not. Clearly that pikuach nefesh warrants the shechita does not allow anything to be done for even muksa to be handled to the kisa dam. So it says the Gemara, it's a mefursha brisa. Says the Gemara, Dilma v'Avriv Hoshachan. Maybe that's not what the brisa is referring to. Maybe when the brisa says that Kisa Dam is not Deicha Shabbos, it's not referring to Pikuach Nefesh. It's referring to a case where a person was Mechal Shabbos. If someone's not religious, he shechs an animal on Shabbos, Bechil Shabbos Mamish. That's when you don't do Kisa Dam. But maybe when it's Pikuach Nefesh, it's allowed. So the Gemara says no. Dumya Demila. Ma'amila brishos, af kisan brishos. It obviously is referring. It can't be referring to chilul. It's referring to a mitzvah. Why? Because the whole discussion is comparing it to bris milah. Bris milah is a mitzvah. So to kis adam is also referring to a mitzvah. What's the case? The case is where is a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is pikuach nefesh, and still it is not doiche Shabbos. You don't do kis adam. Even when you're shechting for pikuach nefesh on Shabbos. I will stop here. We'll pick it up tomorrow, B'ez Hashem.